Hello. In today's lecture, I'll present AES-GCM, an authenticated encryption scheme. AES-GCM combines the AES encryption scheme in counter mode with a custom-designed authentication scheme, GMAC. AES-GCM is an authenticated encryption scheme designed by David McGrew and John Viega in 2004. It was adopted as a NIST standard in 2007, and since then has become the most widely used authenticated encryption scheme in the world. AES-GCM uses the counter mode of encryption and a custom-designed MAC scheme called GMAC. I'll present these next. The counter mode of encryption is quite straightforward. In a nutshell, the counter mode of encryption uses a block cipher as a stream cipher. The key stream is obtained by encrypting a counter using a block cipher such as AES, and then the resulting key stream is XORed with the blocks of the plaintext. Here are the details. For the sake of concreteness, I'll use AES with 128-bit keys. I'll let K denote the 128-bit secret key, and I'll suppose that the plaintext M has been broken up into 128-bit blocks. The last block is padded with zeros if necessary. The number of blocks is U, which we'll assume is at most 2 to the 32 minus 2. Since a block is 128 bits, this means that the plaintext M is at most 2 to the 36 minus 32 bytes long, or roughly at most 68.7 gigabytes long. To encrypt the plaintext M, Alice does the following. She selects a nonce called IV of bit length 96. Recall that a nonce is a non-repeating quantity. In practice, it can either be a counter or a randomly selected bit string. In the latter case, the probability of a nonce repeating isn't zero, but is sufficiently small. Alice then initializes the counter J0 to be the concatenation of the IV with the string of 31 zeros, followed by a 1-bit. So J0 is a block of length 128 bits. Then, from I from 1 to U, Alice increments the counter block, encrypts it using AES, and then XORs the resulting encrypted block with the plaintext block MI to get the ciphertext block CI. She sends the IV and the ciphertext blocks C1 through CU to Bob. So just like Cha-Cha-20, the counter mode of encryption uses a nonce and a counter. This guards against the accidental reuse of keystream. To decrypt the ciphertext, Bob initializes J0, and then, just as Alice did, he increments the counter, encrypts the counter, and adds the resulting encrypted block to the ciphertext to recover the plaintext. You can see that counter mode is essentially using a block cipher as a stream cipher. As with Cha-Cha-20, it's critical that IVs should not be repeated. The IV could be implemented as a counter. However, it can be difficult in practice to ensure that IV repetition doesn't occur in distributed environments where the secret key might be stored and used on several machines. If the IV is randomly selected, then, since IVs are 96 bits long, the probability of repeating an IV is sufficiently small. Unlike CBC mode of encryption, counter mode of encryption is parallelizable. Suppose that Alice is encrypting a very long message, let's say 1,000,000 blocks long, and suppose that she has 2 processors available to her. Alice can use the first processor to encrypt the first half of the message. At the same time, the second processor can be used to encrypt the second half of the message, but this time by incrementing the counter J0 by 500,000 before beginning to encrypt. Observe that the AES decryption operation is not used in counter mode. The authentication mechanism in AES-GCM uses an operation that multiplies 128-bit blocks to get a new 128-bit block. This operation is multiplication in the Galois field GF2 to the 128. The operation is similar to multiplication in GF2 to the 8 that we saw in AES encryption in video V2e. Let A be a 128-bit block. We associate with this block the binary polynomial a of x of degree at most 127. The leftmost bit of the block, namely a0, is the constant coefficient of the polynomial, and the rightmost bit of the block, namely a127, is its leading coefficient. Let f of x be this fixed polynomial of degree 128. F of x is irreducible over the integers modulo 2. Now, if a and b are 128-bit blocks, then we'll define their product c to be the block corresponding to the polynomial c of x, which is defined to be a of x times b of x modulo f of x. In other words, c of x is the remainder upon dividing the polynomial product a of x times b of x by the polynomial f of x, where coefficient arithmetic is performed modulo 2. This is multiplication in the Galois field GF2 to the 128. I'll next describe GMAC, the MAC scheme used in AES-GCM. Let A be the message to be authenticated. A is broken up into 128-bit blocks, and there are V of them. If needed, the last block is padded with zeros. Let L be the bit length of A before any padding zeros are added, and encode L as a 128-bit block. K is a 128-bit secret key shared between Alice and Bob. To compute the authentication tag, Alice does the following. Initialize a 128-bit block J0 by concatenating a 96-bit nonce IV, a string of 31 zeros, and a single 1-bit. Then, AES encrypt the block of all zeros to get the block H. Now, define the polynomial fa of x to be the polynomial with indeterminate x, and whose coefficients are the blocks of A and also the length block. The polynomial fa of x has degree v plus 1, where v is the number of blocks in A. Fa of x is a polynomial whose coefficients can be interpreted as being in the Galois field GF2 to the 128. Then, the authentication tag T for A is defined to be the XOR of two blocks. The first block is the AES encryption of J0. And the second block is the result of evaluating the polynomial fa of x at H. Note that when performing this evaluation, addition and multiplication of blocks are done in the field GF2 to the 128. And so the result of the evaluation is indeed a single block. The IV, authenticated data A, and the tag T are transmitted.
Note that the secret key is only used twice, to compute H in step 2, and to encrypt J0 in step 4. The legitimate receiver, Bob, who knows the secret key K, recomputes T from A and the IV, and confirms that the tag he computes is equal to the one that Alice sent him.
Evaluation of the polynomial fa at h can be done using Horner's rule. I'll demonstrate this with a 3-block message A. fa of x is this degree 4 polynomial, and this is the evaluation of fa at h. First, the blocks A1 and H are multiplied to get a new block. A2 is then added to this block, and the resulting block is multiplied by H, and so on. The evaluation requires 3 additions and 4 multiplications in GF 2 to the 128. In general, if A has block length V, then evaluating FA at H requires V additions and V plus 1 multiplications in GF 2 to the 128. Let me give you an outline of an argument for the security of GMAC. Consider the simplified tag T primed, i.e., without adding the encryption of J0. The adversary, who doesn't know H and hasn't seen any message tag pairs, can guess the tag T primed of a message A with success probability 1 over 2 to the 128. This is because the tag space has size 2 to the 128. The adversary can also guess T primed by first making a guess H primed for H, and then evaluating the polynomial FA at H primed. The success probability is now at most V plus 1 divided by 2 to the 128, where V is the block length of A. This is because there are as many as V plus 1 blocks H, for which FA of H equals T primed. So tag guessing has a very small success probability. However, if the adversary sees a single valid message tag pair, she can solve this polynomial equation for H. To circumvent this attack, a second secret, the AES encryption of J0, is used to hide T primed by adding it to FA of H. So the secret encryption of J0 serves as a one-time pad for T primed. I'll next describe AES-GCM Authenticated Encryption. The input to the Authenticated Encryption procedure has 3 components. First, there's the data to be authenticated but not encrypted. This might be some header data. This data is presented as a string A of V128-bit blocks. We assume that the bit length of A is at most 2 to the 64 minus 1 before any padding of 0 bits. Second, there's the data M that needs to be encrypted and authenticated, presented as U128-bit blocks. And third, there's a secret key K, which is a randomly selected 128-bit string. The output of the authenticated encryption procedure is a 96-bit IV. The authenticated data A, which is identical to the data in the input. The encrypted authenticated data C, which has the same length as the data M, and a 128-bit authentication tag T.
Note that there's very little overhead in the authenticated encryption data, namely a 96-bit IV and a 128-bit tag T.
Okay, let me now describe the AES-GCM encryption authentication procedure. Alice first forms a 128-bit length block L, which consists of the 64-bit representation LA of the bit length of A and the 64-bit representation LM of the bit length of the plaintext M. She then encrypts the data M using AES in counter mode. So she selects a 96-bit IV, initializes the counter J0, and then For each block MI and M, she increments the counter, encrypts the counter, and adds the resulting block to the plaintext block MI to get the ciphertext block CI. Next, she authenticates A and the ciphertext C using GMAC. So Alice computes H as the AES encryption of the 0 block. She computes the AES encryption of J0 and adds it to the block obtained by evaluating the polynomial FAC at H. FAC is the polynomial in X whose coefficients are the V blocks of A, the U blocks of the ciphertext C, and the length block. Note that F has degree U plus V plus 1. As in GMAC, FAC is a polynomial in X whose coefficients are 1/28-bit blocks, interpreted as elements in the Galois field GF2 to the 128. Here is the AES-GCM decryption authentication procedure. Upon receiving the IV, the data A and ciphertext C, and the tag T, Bob does the following. He computes the length block L just as Alice did. He computes the tag T prime of A and C just as Alice did, and accepts provided that T prime equals T. If the tags are equal, then Bob proceeds to decrypt the ciphertext to get the plaintext M. So you can see that the AES-GCM decryption authentication procedure is very similar to the encryption authentication procedure.
So to summarize, AES-GCM is an authenticated encryption scheme that combines the very strong encryption scheme AES with the authentication mechanism GMAC. AES-GCM performs both authentication and encryption. It supports authentication only by using an empty message M. It has very fast software implementations on Intel and AMD processors. This is because these processors have custom-built instructions for AES operations, called AES-NI, and for GF2 to the power 1/28 multiplication, called PCL-MUL. As I mentioned earlier, encryption and decryption can be parallelized. Moreover, AES-GCM can be used in streaming mode. By streaming mode, I mean that both the encryption and the authentication operations can be performed on the blocks of A and M as they are received, one at a time. This is useful in streaming applications. Lastly, I'll note that the security of AES-GCM is justified by a security proof. The original proof by McGrew and Viega from 2004 was found to be flawed. The flaw was discovered in 2012 and also fixed in 2012.
Here are some speed benchmarks for AES encryption and GMAC authentication. As you can see, these operations are sped up considerably when the AES-NI and PCL-MUL instructions are available. I'll conclude this lecture by highlighting the dangers of IV reusage in AES-GCM. Suppose that Alice encrypts two plaintext messages M1 and M2 using the same IV. For simplicity, suppose that M1 and M2 have the same block length. Suppose also that an adversary captures the two encrypted authenticated transmissions, so IV A1 C1 T1 and IV A2 C2 T2. Finally, suppose that the eavesdropper knows M1, so this is a known plaintext attack. The eavesdropper can add M1 and C1 to get the keystream. This is the same keystream that was used to encrypt M2, since the IV was the same in both encryptions. So the eavesdropper can add the key stream to C2 to obtain M2. Thus, confidentiality of M2 is lost, as one expects when key stream is reused in a stream cipher. But the eavesdropper can do a lot more damage. Recall that T1 and T2 are given by these expressions. The eavesdropper adds T1 and T2, and the AES-J0 terms cancel to give this expression. Since the adversary knows T1, T2, A1, C1, A2, and C2, the only unknown in this expression is H. So the underlined expression is a polynomial equation in the variable H. It turns out that polynomial equations can be solved efficiently. One expects that the equation has two solutions, one of them being the correct value for H. So the eavesdropper can guess the correct H and then determine the AES encryption of J0. Now, with knowledge of H, the AES encryption of J0, and the key stream, the eavesdropper can properly encrypt any plaintext M of block length at most that of M1. She does this by reusing the IV. You can check for yourself that this works. So reusing IV not only resulted in loss of confidentiality for M2, but a complete break of authentication.
All right, we're ready to move on to the public key portion of the course. V6a presents important notions in public key cryptography, including public key encryption, digital signatures, and hybrid cryptography. We'll also cover some of the historical development of the field. Have a great day.